Hello, you are on the channel with interesting stories. Sit back and let us. We start. Women who are devoted to the end, we just don't. Exists with very rare exceptions, every man knows about it, only one. The second one is going through the trouble of putting up with it, and the third one is trying his best not to pay attention to it. Attention, I lived with my wife for almost 40 years, we got married. When I was 20 and she was 19 years old, things happened. And we fought and made up, but I was sure that during all this time we never betrayed each other, and yet no matter where fate took me, she was always next to me. We gave birth to two beautiful children, a son, Pavel, and daughter Katya, are now adults and both have their own families and children. I am sure that a calm, peaceful old age awaited us ahead, surrounded by our beloved grandchildren. I am a doctor. Served in the army for 25 years, rose to the rank of colonel of the medical service, and for 10 years since I was retired. Well, retired is a strong word. Today I continue to work in a private clinic, although I keep a scalpel in hands. Not often. Age still takes its toll, but I conduct a therapeutic appointment. Nastia, that's my wife's name. She also still works at an advertising company. Education designer. To say that we were experiencing financial difficulties, yes, no. We just worked for our own pleasure. During my service I visited many places. I was in Africa almost a year, in Mongolia, in Vietnam. The truth of these countries, I hardly saw the doctors work almost around the clock, and military, and even more so. Then came the hot spots of the collapsing Union. But every time I returned home, I knew that a loving wife and children were waiting for me. At least that's what I thought. Alas, it turned out it was just an attempt. Despite my age, my wife managed to pass off wishful thinking. Preserve her natural beauty. She always took care of herself. What allowed her to maintain a girlish figure and face without a single wrinkle. When we walked next to her, they took her for my young mistress. The contrast was too sharp. Young blonde and gray-haired mature man daddy with a young mistress. Nastia was very amused by this contrast, and it flattered me too, but as it turned out, in vain. I had fun. It all happened one rainy November evening. Have you noticed that events change our lives for the worse? Happens precisely on rainy autumn evenings, as if dying nature is trying. It was late autumn, cold and cold. The spring wind dispersed the drops. Cold autumn rain on the window glass, turning them into slopes of the trickle. I sat at the kitchen table and went through documents in search of my medical books. On Monday I had a medical examination at the clinic, and I was to find her vaccination card. Nastia was not at home. She had left for city to buy groceries and cook Sunday dinner for us. I was looking through old documents for a long time, some certificates that had turned yellow with time, and suddenly I discovered something that plunged me into a real shock. It was an extract from my wife's medical record. It dated precisely from that period when I was on a long business trip, and I hadn't been home for almost a year, just 4 years after my daughter was born. The extract talked about Nastia's pregnancy and premature birth tests and ultrasound results. It turns out that Nastia was born during this period of time. A premature 6-month-old baby. Having lived for 3 days, he died and moved on. Tests of her and the child's blood type, Rh factor, and so on. So the child was rhesus negative and at the same time the third group. My blood was in such a state as if at least a closet had collapsed on me. I could not be the father of the child. Nastia and I have the second blood type and positive rhesus, that is, our common child could not have such blood counts. Only the second and Rh positive, and finally the child could not have been originally mine because I was simply not in the country at that time. I looked for a long time with an unseeing gaze at extract and could not collect my scattered thoughts into a heap. Nastia is not faithful to me. While I was away from home, she managed to get pregnant and almost gave birth. Child, but from whom half an hour ago I was. I am sure that I have a strong family, a loving wife and a cloudless future now. My back was only the ruins. Finally I managed to pull myself together. Carefully put the certificates in place and hid the found extract in a briefcase. The most important thing is to calm down and not worry about the fact that Nastia cheated. This is a documented fact for me. Honestly, I had a desire. Arrange a showdown immediately after my wife returns, but I wanted to figure everything out first. Children here everything was clear between them there was a difference of 9 years. Both Pavel and Katya had the second blood group. And it was clear that they were mine. Both looked like a young me, as much as children can look like their father. I had no doubts, I was their father, but this thought didn't make me feel any better. I couldn't understand why she did this to me. We got married for love for almost a year. Looked after her, there were no other female persons for me, although I had an attractive appearance and was not deprived of the attention of the opposite sex. But for me all my life there was only one woman, my Nastia. Throughout our life together, I tried to surround my wife with care and attention. Sometimes it seemed to me that I didn't have that other single life. My wife was everything to me and even more in this. My heart ached. I went out onto the balcony for a breath of fresh air. Looking down I saw in the light of a dimly burning street lamp as if near our entrance a car stopped after some time and flew out of it. My wife and after her a man appeared. He opened the back door and took out packages. Nastia quickly kissed him on the cheek, took the packages and went into the entrance. The man plopped down into the driver's seat and the car slowly drove out the yard, and the further you go, the more joyfully the lock of the front door clicks. Yura, you're home. Your wife's voice sounded unexpectedly loud and I realized that I couldn't stand it and would start sorting things out right now. I stopped by Marinka's to chat. Nastia's voice had healed and didn't express any emotion. Well, let's sit too long, now I'll quickly cook something. Why are you so like that? Pout. She kissed me on the cheek and I smelled the fresh smell of alcohol. Well, don't frown with Marinka. We drank a little champagne. She erased it from mine. Cheeks traces of lipstick. So she gave you a ride. I tried my best. Speak calmly. Nastia looked at me with some unfamiliar gaze. It was clear from her that she doesn't know how to answer me. Yura, don't force it. I came by taxi. Or rather, an acquaintance gave me a ride. My wife was feverishly looking for the right one. Answer, what's the problem? Yes, nothing, just probably it was a very close friend. Since you kissed him goodbye, my heart was pounding so much that it seemed to me even the neighbors can hear it. To keep themselves occupied and calm down I got up and took out an open bottle of whiskey from the cabinet. Nastia looked at me in fear. And how do you know? I stood on the balcony and saw you saying goodbye to the driver to me. It took a lot of effort to remain calm and not start shouting. Kiss this fair or like Yura? What Yura? Hello, I poured myself a whiskey. Sit down, I have some for you. Questions. I pulled a stool from under the table and took it out of the diplomat. Explained the unfortunate extract to Nastia that it was I who put the document in front of her wife. She carefully turned several pages and quickly pulled her hand back. It was Nastia who looked up at me and her eyes began to fill with tears. What are you doing? Read Nastia, who were you pregnant with? What happened? I took the glass but couldn't force herself to drink. She was silent for a while and then suddenly said, in an unexpectedly calm voice, it had to happen someday and maybe it's even good that this happened now, she said in an even, calm voice. That in my absence. She emphasized a very long absence to her. She met a young man whom she fell in love with. He was 11 years younger. It was like an obsession, she couldn't help it. First she ran to him on a date. Then I took the children to my mother and he moved into our apartment with her. They began to live as husband and wife. And from sessions of unearthly love she became pregnant and he proposed to her. To her married woman, the mother of my 2 children. In a love stupor, she even secretly hoped that I wouldn't come back at all and then everything will settle down by itself. They will get married and be together. But something didn't work out. The child was born premature and died 3 days later. At this point she burst into tears. I understood that she then cared about the remaining children. Don't care after the death of the child, the relationship between them cooled and, according to her, they became move away from each other later. A young lady and her lover finally left her in pursuit of new adventures. After waiting for some time, Nastia took the children and began to wait for me. When I returned, she met me as if nothing had happened, and all subsequent years diligently played the role of a loving and caring wife. I was shocked. To be honest, for some time I lost the ability to think and say anything at all. I silently looked at the wall and not a single thought popped into my head. Just stared blankly at one point, but that wasn't all. 6 months ago, a dear friend appeared in our city. Passion flared up with renewed vigor. It turns out she loved him all these years, and my wife fell into his arms like overripe plum in manure. In general, they meet all this time and she wants to start a new life in which, unfortunately, there is no place for me. She lived with me for 40 years, gave me the best years, and now that the children are adults, she wants to start all over again with her loved one. Saying all this, she is wonderful. I understood that with every word she said she was simply killing me. For a second she reminded me of an executioner indifferently doing his job. Nothing personal, it's love, that's how it happens now. Everything. You can exhale and drink. What happened next? I poured some whiskey again and drank some strange drink in one gulp. Doesn't creep in at all. Maybe you sneezed. I took the bottle and looked at it in the light. No, the color seems normal. Light brown is what aged Irish whiskey should be like. But I realized I just need to pour more, that it's really me, or maybe not. Pour straight from the neck. Did you notice that the bottle has good whiskey? The wide, comfortable neck, like a decanter, is very convenient, let me tell you. The glass is practically not needed. Nastia sat opposite me and was silent. I was even worried maybe something had happened, or it was just kerosene. Ended so well, spoke so smoothly. Clever girl, she cheated me for so many years. If I hadn't found the extract, I probably wouldn't have guessed anything further. Well done, real hereditary woman. And what words? It happens, of course it happens. You'll think it's a problem. It happens, and you still have to close the window when it's cold. I got up, pushed the stool with my foot and went to the bedroom. Without saying a word he got dressed, threw some things into his bag, and also without saying Yura went to the exit without a word. Half a question hung in the air. You don't have to go away for the night. I looked at her. Her figure stood out in dark silhouette against the background of the kitchen doorway. Why don't you tell me anything? She'll cry now, or it seems to me. The poor girl was so nervous. I shrugged my shoulders, opened the door and went out, trying not to touch the doorframe with my horns. Autumn was waiting for me on the street. Took a deep breath of the damp air, threw the bag over his shoulder and slowly wandered along the sidewalk strewn with yellow leaves, and really wanted to smoke. I even patted my pockets just in case. Of course I didn't find anything. I quit smoking 20 years ago at Nastia's request. She was very concerned about my health. And longevity was already quite late. The city tried to forget itself in an uneasy sleep. The windows of the houses were almost dark, and only the lanterns cast dim light for almost deserted streets. Nastia's cell phone beeps. She's worried about. To my husband, I pressed the end call and turned off the phone. Suddenly such melancholy came over me that I held my coat collar between my teeth so as not to forget. Out of despair, only now did the realization come to me. Happened, I even shook my head as if I could drive away this way. Thoughts that were killing me, what to do, where to go. The easiest way is to slam the door and leave with your head held high. But where to go to the children? They already have enough problems. I've never had a mistress, probably in vain, just for work, like on duty. Hang out for the night and make a final decision tomorrow. I walked slowly past black houses, trying not to slip on wet fallen leaves. Hey man, I can't find a cigarette. I turned around and fell into the darkness. A bright light burst into my eyes like a special forces platoon in a bandit raspberry well. finally said a man's voice very close to me. Turned his head with difficulty. With the return of Yuri Ivanovich, my boss did not hide his. I looked at me with joy, and words were difficult for me. Yes, you were brought to our clinic tonight with a traumatic brain injury to emergency hospital. You had the documents with you and they called us. We took you away and immediately operated on you. The operation was successful and you are back with. We informed your children and wife. The son is already on his way. The investigator promised to come to his wife after lunch. Do I really have a wife? Recent events have made my heart ache again. Wife. I didn't have a wife anymore. The door to the room creaked. Dad, hello, how are you feeling? My son Pavel kissed me on the cheek. You made us nervous. He carefully placed the package on the nightstand. Here, fruit and other juice are not allowed yet. Pavel straightened my blanket. My mother couldn't come yet for some reason. Urgent matters. She doesn't need to come. Okay, just don't worry. It seems Pasha knew everything about our breakup. I wonder what Nastia sang to him. But what? Ex-wives say in such a situation: he didn't love me, he didn't caress me, he killed me. Woman, okay, enough of the snot, as Chingachgook said. The big snake of the past does not count. 2 weeks later I was discharged. Nastia came to see me twice. But I refused to meet her. The past doesn't count. For the first time I rented a small apartment not far from the clinic where I worked and began to get used to single life. The breakup with my wife had a twofold effect on me. Action on the one hand is of course pain from betrayal, and on the other hand, some still unclear prospects. The only thing I knew for sure was no new ones. Connections with women, the vaccination against new relationships was tough. Then there was a divorce and I was left not only without a wife but also without my corner. The children took a neutral position, but it was clear that they were more on the mother's side. Work. I started operating again. At work I tried to drown out my spiritual pain and I succeeded. I didn't get drunk like this. Sometimes happens with abandoned husbands. About 2 months later he called me. Old friend, and asked to meet Yura. Remember a few years ago I took. You have a large sum. He started the conversation. I remembered this. 3 years ago Sergei borrowed a fairly large amount of money from me. He had serious problems with his business and there was no way to ask for help. To whom I had just sold my mother's apartment and I had the money and giving it to my friend. I did not indicate a deadline for repaying the debt, understanding that I would return the money immediately. Sergei is simply not able to. Sergei improved his affairs. But I was in no hurry to repay the debt. I understood that if I asked about the debt, I would lose my friend. My father also said while borrowing money to a friend, imagine what you are giving him. And if you value this person, don't remind him of the debt. The time will come, he will give it back if he can. Thank you for helping me out then. Now I'm back afloat, my business is going more than successfully, Sergei continued. I invested your money in business and today it brings good results. Dividends. He handed me a bank card. This. My debt with interest is 5 times more than what you lent me then. Yes, it was very useful. I bought myself a small cottage not far from the city and I had no time to take care of the car and I hired an assistant. She was younger than me. Almost 15 years old, a fairly young woman has already achieved to be married to her ex-husband. She lived for almost 20 years. They had no children due to her infertility and her husband eventually left her and went to another. Neighbor told me all this. Natasha herself did not elaborate on this topic. No plans about it. I didn't have an assistant, no more. It was almost like that. 6 months. One day I was chopping wood and felt bad. I had a terrible headache and I lost consciousness and came to in the hospital next to mine. Natasha was sitting on the bed. It was she who called the ambulance when the doctors arrived. She sat holding my head on her lap. Everything worked out for me, just traumatic brain injuries. It's not that easy. Passes, but after this incident I began to look at Natasha with different eyes and only now I realized what a beautiful woman she is. Somehow our relationship turned into intimacy, and at one point I asked her to marry me. In the fall we got married. I knew that we couldn't have children, so I'm in love with her. Acted relaxed. About 3 months after the wedding, Natasha felt unwell. Vomiting, headaches. I immediately took her to my clinic. What was my surprise when it turned out that she was pregnant, I remember, for almost 2 months. Natasha then told me that no matter what you say, I will leave the child. I pressed her tightly to me and kissed her in my dear eyes. Just then I understood one truth: if fate closes one door in front of us, it immediately opens another. In general, life was getting better. And then one day just before the new year, Nastia called me. We need to meet, in some plaintively pleading voice. She said, I booked a table at the restaurant, please come by 7 p.m. I beg you. Nastia sat opposite me with all her appearance expressing humility and repentance. Yura, forgive me, I haven't been here for a single day. So that I don't think about you. Her eyes began to fill with tears. I made a terrible mistake. I betrayed you, our family, our children. She continued to talk and I silently looked at my once madly beloved. A woman for whom I would give my life without hesitation. A woman who without hesitation twice cynically betrayed me to the one who lied to me for almost 20 years. For a woman who cut me out of her life and left for another man. And now she suddenly came to her senses and is trying to come back to me. Nastia kept repeating.
That time spent without me helped her understand how much she loves me. That only now she understands that I was the only real man in her life. For some reason she reminded me of a siren from Greek mythology. Her words tightened and lulled me into fantasies about what was only for me. Her heart belongs. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. She's like a spell repeated this word, and I looked at her mouth painted with bright lipstick, which delighted my ears with such sweet words, and imagined how she kisses and caresses to her lover. Does she really think that I will believe her words? That she is confused? That she is not knew what she wanted? That this woman who cheated on me, gave birth to a child from her lover, left me and spent her free time with another man, and never thought about me? She came back because it turns out she only loved me one time. She found an excuse for her meanness and left me without hesitation. She managed to get sensual in full pleasure with her lover, having been in his bed more than once and calmly planning the moment to deal me the final fatal blow. And now she's here to offer me the only valuable thing she has left. Though with all her might already used by her lover, she realized that he needed her only for entertainment, and as long as she had money, that she could not have a future with him, that now there is no one to provide for her financially. Having realized all this, she crawled to me in hoping to try to return what was lost. Lord, do I seem so stupid to her? Ready to believe all her lies, I silently listened to her complete repentance monologue to me. There was nothing to say to her, you know. I didn't revel in her humiliation and didn't gloat it. I even felt humanly sorry for her. After all, 40 years together. But it was time to end our meeting, and at that moment my phone rang. Natasha called and asked where to take me to come. I gave the address and began to say goodbye. This is your woman? Nastia asked quietly and looked at me with eyes full of tears. Yes. And how long have you together? Yes. This has been happening for almost a year and a half now. I got up. Goodbye. Nastia tried to be happy leaving the restaurant. I turned around. Nastia stood with her hands pressed to her chest and looked at me through a festively decorated showcase around me. People were bustling around and rushing somewhere. Continued on the other side of the street with bright lights. An advertisement for Coca-Cola flashed obsessively. Drink and feel. Joe tried to lie. I got into the car and turned the ignition key. The engine purred smoothly and peacefully. I turned left and, after a few seconds, I joined the traffic. Forever cars hurrying somewhere. This is the story. Subscribe to the channel and click on the bell so you don't miss new stories.